doing it, you know.
Yeah.
They're going to do it as well, you know. I just don't think there's a big thing about, you know, just don't make it such a big issue. Don't just have it there.
Is it a bit of, I don't know.
Are you going to say PC gone mad?
No, not at all. But
Right.
is it a bit of what if I wanted a nice glass of lemon and pineapple, nice glass of Fanta? Where's my choice in that?
Well, I think, you know, it's only one event.
Yeah.
And then you can go home and get into
On your
your
way home,
LNP
just
thing.
stop in
Yeah.
the drive-through at McDonald's, bro.
I went to my brother's wedding. Was dry, okay, so we just had nothing but fizzy grape juice and water.
Yeah.
And then we just went after the wedding. That was lovely. We went off and we had drinks after that.
Like all my
You're not
muckles
gonna
now,
die.
Yeah, all my muckles now, they drink water.
Yeah.
They just drink water and more water. And it's a bit like the seatbelt thing with babies, you know. They grow into it as they grow up. And they stop fighting to get out of it because now it's become a normative way of doing things. It's just so is water, you know. You just
Tell me, Fede, do you think there's a bit of a sea change around New Zealand amongst our young, sort of acknowledging water as a bit of a drink, as a refresher?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
Well, it's free. That's got to be good,
that's
isn't
a good
it?
thing too, you know. Yeah.
Bit of chilled water, eh? Coming up to 5 o'clock, I wanted to sort of sneak this one in because I found it quite fascinating. Workplace perks. A well-stocked beer fridge, gym memberships, free snacks, meditation rooms. Companies have them mostly in the name of staff retention. But the nature of perks are changing. It seems, Fede, that a well-stocked beer fridge doesn't really cut it for a lot of for employees anymore.
Oh my gosh! I've been looking for their fridge at the University of Auckland at the criminology department for ages.
You've got to earn your way to the key for the beer fridge.
There somewhere.
I'm personally amenable to a nice cold beer at the end of a working week. That would be a perk for me, but it doesn't seem to be a perk for others, Catherine.
No, absolutely not. I mean,
Why not?
I am an employer, and you know, and we do things like we'll have drinks on a Friday night, but it will do it only if they want to. You know, so it's more like you just be led by the employees as to what's useful for them. And they, you know, it's good that they get in the habit of sort of saying, well, could we do this or could we do that? And you go, yeah, absolutely. It's not going to cost me a fortune. That's great. And it means it's wanted.
So what, as an employer, what sort of feedback do employees tell you about the sort of perks that they want?
Well, I mean, the things that work for us are things like, you know, you can have a working lunch. We'll do something every so often so you can supply them with food. You just have drinks if they want to on a Friday night. We do things like offer if we see a good, like, course that they might want to go on, you know, just offer it to them and say, well, do you want to do this? You know,
training's quite an incentive, isn't it? To actually sort of upskill yourself. Yeah,
I mean, 3 of them went on a creative writing course just in the weekends. So it was their own time, but we paid for it, and they absolutely loved it. And
that's a good perk.
Yeah, that was Dominic Hoy, and he just does fantastic sort of courses. And
he's a fantastic writer.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. So they went on that, and we've got another. I'm trying to work out I got to have a stress management with you know, Gwendolyn Smith, who's written that book of Knowing. I'm kind of sort of seeing whether we can do something with her at work as well for them, and I just think things like that are so useful.
What about leave? Leave when you want.
Yeah, we try and, well, we got to have a certain amount of time during the day where they've got to work, but autonomy and responsibility and trust.
Very good. Brian Ferry, when his guitarist had a heart attack on stage. Fascinating stuff. Hey, it's been great to have you on, Catherine Robinson.
That doesn't sound boring.
No, it doesn't sound boring at all. And Fete Taito, come back again.
No worries, Morris.
We'd love to have you back. All right. And I'm back with you tomorrow. See you later.
Thank
Checkpoint
you.
now.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, a clear directive to Lime scooters: shape up or scoot off. Auckland Transport boss Dr Lester Levy calls out Lime's slow response to a serious brake fault. He wants proof the whole fleet is safe by Friday, or he wants them off the roads. The final day of evidence in serial rapist Malcolm Rewa's trial, a friend of Susan Burdett's claims the murdered woman had a secret boyfriend. 5,000 early childhood carers have been told to upskill or lose government funding. We're in the thick of it at Te Matatini, the biggest kapahaka competition in the country. And from gourmet dips to rosé and chardonnay and their $1 million profits, what's charitable about that?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. A man who pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of a Christchurch woman, plus another similar murder 25 years ago, was the groomsman of David Bain. Paul Pounamu Tainui, also known as Paul Russell Wilson, can now be named as the man responsible for killing Nicole Tuxford in 2018. Suppression of his name and previous offending was lifted in the High Court at Christchurch today. Tainui was imprisoned in 1994 for the murder of his ex-partner. An advocate for David Bain, Joe Karam, says Mr Bain was shocked to hear Mr Tainui had murdered again. The two met in prison but have not been in close contact for 2 years.
When David was still in Christchurch, Paul had appeared to be, not only to David, but to everybody else, really getting on with his life very well. And so when this happened, it came as a complete surprise and absolutely shocked David and everybody else to the court. It was just was so unexpected after so many years.
Joe Karam says Mr Bain feels distressed at what Ms Tuxford's family have to go through. Mr Bain spent 13 years in prison after being found guilty of murdering his family in 1994. He was found not guilty at a retrial. The head of Auckland Transport wants Lime electric scooters off the road this week unless they can provide solid proof the whole fleet is safe. Several people have been catapulted off the e-scooters due to a braking fault that randomly locks up the wheels. The chair of the agency, Lester Levy, says he raised questions about Lime's safety as far back as October. The licence for Lime's Auckland trial, which expires at the end of March, was approved by Auckland Council staff with input from Auckland Transport. But Dr Levy says the decision to greenlight Lime should have been a matter for the board of Auckland Transport. He accuses Lime of being slow to respond to problems and says a full safety assessment should have been done before the scooters hit the streets. Lime has declined requests for an interview. The head of the GCSB has told MPs he came under no political or diplomatic pressure over Spark's plan to partner with the Chinese technology firm Huawei. Spark is still considering whether to submit a revised proposal to the GCSB in hope of partnering with the company to deliver 5G to New Zealanders. The government spy agency rejected a previous bid to include Huawei due to security concerns. The GCSB Director General Andrew Hampton told Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee he has a regulatory role.
My decision was independent from ministers, and while we share intelligence with Five Eyes partners, there was no pressure, requests or demands made by partners, either publicly or privately, to ban any vendor.
Andrew Hampton also reported a 10% increase in cyber attacks from foreign governments to the committee. Susan Burdett's best friend has told a jury she confided in her about a secret affair before she died. Malcolm Rewa is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, accused of murdering Ms Burdett, who was found clubbed to death in her South Auckland home 27 years ago. Rewa, who also goes by the name Michael Lewis, has been convicted of raping her, but maintains they were in a secret relationship when she was killed. Today, Ms Burdett's best friend, Winsome Anstey, says her friend told her she was seeing a man named Mike.
She did tell me his full name, but I only remember the name Mike. He was a Maori man. He had gang affiliations. He was married. I think she said he had kids. And she met him down at the Tempin Bowling.
Winsome Anstey. The court had previously heard Rewa was a member of the Highway 61 gang with a wife and kids. The Chief Ombudsman is unhappy about the use of restraints and staffing shortages at one of the country's biggest prisons. Peter Bosier's report says inmates are locked in their cells at the Auckland South Corrections Facility for extended periods of time and rehabilitation needs aren't being met. Mr Bosier says the lock-ins are a response to high staff turnover and roster difficulties, and as a result, prisoners do not have enough time outside their cells. His report also says staff occasionally use non-approved techniques to control prisoners and have used force when inmates weren't a threat. The Serco-run prison has accepted all but one of Mr Bosier's 36 recommendations. The government's announcement of a minimum qualification for home-based early childhood educators has divided the sector. Some say the new rule will force at-home educators out of business, but others say it's not a problem. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
70% of the 7,700 people providing at-home care for under 5-year-olds have no early childhood qualification. The government says that's not good enough, and in-home educators are going to need at least a Level 4 certificate in early learning if they want government subsidies. That split the two main organisations representing the sector. The Home Early Learning Organisation says qualifications are not the only way of ensuring quality, and the rule will drive many carers out of the industry. But the Home-Based Childcare Association backs the government, saying research shows qualifications raise the quality of children's early education. Ko John Garrett's in TNA.
It's 5:05. The Black Caps are on course for a series whitewash of Bangladesh, with the tourists slumping to 94 for 5 after 21 overs as they chase 331 to win the third and final one-dayer in Dunedin. New Zealand posted 330 for 6, with Ross Taylor top scoring with 69, while Henry Nicholls and Tom Latham also made half-centuries. The innings saw Taylor become New Zealand's leading run scorer in one-day cricket, surpassing former skipper Stephen Fleming. Fleming scored 8,007 runs from 279 matches, while Taylor has passed that mark in his 218th.
I suppose you play long enough, some of these records come along, but no, it's about trying to play as many games as you can for your country, and these records come, but at the same time it's nice to set the bar for the next guy, probably Guppy and then Kane after that.
Ross Taylor. Backline stars Waisake Naholo and Aaron Smith are among 4 All Blacks promoted into the Highlanders starting team to play the Queensland Reds in Dunedin on Friday. Winger Naholo will make his first appearance of the year, while halfback Smith is promoted from the bench. There are 5 starting changes in total for the Highlanders, including a starting upgrade for flankers Shannon Frizzell and Dylan Hunt, who both made Test debuts last year. It is the first match for the Reds, who had an opening round bye. And the New Zealand UFC middleweight fighter Israel Adesanya will face American Kelvin Gastelum for the interim middleweight title in April. A venue for the fight is to be confirmed. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the final episode of The Chase, where science meets adventure, in which Belinda Smith travels deep into the Australian outback, where they've discovered 95-million-year-old dinosaur prints in a dry creek bed. And the Australian journalist Phil Barker on his book, The Revolution of Man, a 21st century take on what it means to be a bloke. See how far we've come? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine spells, a few showers in Northland spreading elsewhere this afternoon or evening. Waitomo to Whanganui, including the central high country. Fine today, scattered showers tomorrow, some possibly heavy. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today, isolated showers tomorrow, more frequent and possibly heavy south of Napier from the afternoon. Manawatu to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Cloudy periods, isolated showers from Kapiti northwards tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine with high cloud. Isolated showers about the Canterbury foothills today. Areas of coastal low cloud morning and night. For Bulla and Westland, occasional showers, some heavy, possibly thundery about Westland tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with scattered showers turning to rain in Fiordland at night. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, occasional rain tomorrow. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm Lisa Owen and you're listening to Checkpoint. Tonight, a clear directive to Lime to prove your scooters are safe by Friday or get all of them off our roads. That's from the boss of Auckland Transport, Lester Levy, after several riders have been injured, some seriously, when the brakes on Lime scooters have randomly locked up. AT Chairman Dr Levy is also considering an investigation into the role of paid lobbyists in getting Lime into Auckland. That's after Checkpoint revealed to him that behind the scenes, the former Labour Party president and lobbyist Mike Williams was smoothing the way for the Lime rollout. Mr Williams has confirmed to Checkpoint that he was paid by Lime to introduce their representatives to Auckland Transport staff and another key contact, Transport Minister Phil Twyford. The California-based Lime company was issued a licence to operate by Auckland Council staff with input from Auckland Transport. Dr Levy says that decision should have been made higher up and a full safety assessment carried out before Lime scooters were rolled out.
From the outset, I have had serious safety concerns, particularly initially about user behaviour, but more recently we're seeing what could be equipment, either software or mechanical failure. So, yeah, I'm very concerned.
And how have you expressed those concerns?
Well, initially, I think it was on the 25th of October, when, after the recent introduction, I noticed myself a lot of behaviour that I thought was potentially unsafe. I raised that with our chief executive. I asked him to provide me with a summary of how the decision had been made, and I asked him to take whatever action he thought appropriate in order to ensure that this implementation was safe.
Including reviewing Lime's licence to operate here?
Yes, but it's more complicated than that because we don't actually, there's no individual organisation that actually has overall control. So.
But just to be clear, you were so concerned about the injuries that you were seeing and the behaviour on the Lime scooters, you asked the CEO to review the situation.
Yeah, so initially it was more the behaviour. There hadn't been the injuries yet. But what I was concerned about, and also coming from a health background, and I tend to think about these things, I was concerned that this behaviour would lead to injuries. And of course, unfortunately, that has unfolded to be the case.
What's been the response to your request for that review?
Well, good, but slow. So he shares my concerns. We met with Phil Goff, the mayor, and he too was concerned about the safety. We discussed what steps we could take, potentially. We aren't the overall regulator. The mayor wrote to the Minister of Transport. The Minister of Transport responded, and they are actually, at a national level, having a look at safety on the sidewalk overall.
Okay, so, understand that, but isn't this the crux of the problem? So, you know, I've seen an Auckland Transport memo where they talk about going into schools and talking to kids about safety on these scooters. Well, people under the age of 18 aren't supposed to be on them. Yes. After the trial came into being, it seemed like there was scrambling when people realised there was no minimum speed limit, that they were not legally allowed on the cycleways. So how well do you think the overall introduction was handled? Well,
I actually think that if you look back at this, when we have these new technologies, and there will be more of them, and some of them will be like this, you know, a bit of a surprise or disruptors, that I think we should have a formal safety case that is created beforehand, that is considered with due diligence by all the relevant organisations that are critical to this. In your view, that safety case should have been made and carried out, completed, before Lime got its licence? I think for what we've seen unfold, that would be my view. I think that we need to be much more proactive and joined up on this, and I think we should have a safety case. Well, so that translates to it was a mistake to give them their licence, doesn't it? Well, you know, that's a difficult decision to make because I think that these e-scooters are a paradox. Well, given everything that you've seen, everything that you've seen, as you say, you're a medical doctor as well, the concerns that you've raised, is it a mistake that this trial was allowed to go ahead in the form that it is? Well, I would have preferred there to be a safety case, but it's not only the Lime scooters. You only have to look around our streets and there's many e-scooters under personal use. So I think we need to very quickly develop a framework for the safe implementation or ongoing use of these. Their licence is under review right at the moment, and I know our chief executive is closely involved, and Dean Kimpton. Yeah, and I have suggested... But this is all after the fact, so what I want to know is what work did you do before you gave them the go-ahead? Did you look overseas? Did you look at some of the problems they'd had? This is one of the issues that has been surfaced in that this is introduced under what is effectively a bylaw, trading in public places. That's an Auckland Council and Auckland Trading, an Auckland Transport bylaw. In about 2012, Auckland Transport effectively delegated this authority to the council, and that's reasonable because most of this is about people selling cherries or flowers or whatever in public spaces. But probably the people involved with this, at least in my view, should probably have seen that this is more complex than that and probably should have escalated this. For example, at Auckland Transport we have a safety committee of the board, and I would have expected that that would have come through that committee. So which people, specifically, which people should have escalated this? I think that the people, the management people in Auckland Transport and Auckland Council who are dealing with this, I think they should have perhaps thought more carefully about this and probably escalated it. They probably didn't realise the uptake would be as popular as it has been.
Well, a quick Google and they
Yes.
probably would have realised that there were
Yeah,
problems overseas,
yeah.
wouldn't they?
Well, I would have thought that that would all be part of the safety case put forward. One of the problems here is, we cannot let cool trump safety. I think, because they are very cool and people love them. But, I'm very worried about vulnerable users in particular, the elderly, parents with little children themselves. These are people who may not be alert enough, attentive enough, may not see it coming, may not be able to get out of the way quickly enough. They are subject to serious risk, in my view.
So has cool trumped safety in this case, in your view?
I think that, in my view, quite possibly, but no longer. This is being looked at very seriously and very quickly. I think we could.
What does that mean? Looked at very seriously.
Well,
what does that mean?
I think the burden of proof, when you have equipment failure, I think the burden of proof should be on the company that is providing the equipment.
Well, how well is Lime done in this? Because we've been asking for days how many scooters are involved and whether they're all off the roads, and Lime is not giving answers. So how well are they communicating?
Is too slow, and I've asked our chief executive at Auckland Transport, in his involvement, to alter the threshold of this. If we don't get responses quickly, in my view, they should take more severe action, which could involve curtailing the trial.
So you are telling staff at Auckland Transport to warn Lime that their licence could go if they don't stump up with this information?
Indeed.
Within what time frame?
Before the end of this week.
Is that fast enough? You've got people with broken jaws eating their food through straws.
There's not too many days left. Even Friday's too late. And that message has been sent.
Okay. I'm wondering if we could just take it back a few steps. How did you find out about Lime scooters and them coming to New Zealand?
Well, I actually found out about Lime scooters in Paris the first time I saw one, which was a few weeks before I got back to New Zealand. The first time I knew about it is when I was in a park with my dog and saw 3 people, one of whom was an adult, 2 of whom would have been young children, charging around on a Lime scooter. And I saw plenty such behaviour. Now, look...
Hang on. Yeah. You're the chair of Auckland Transport. You're telling me that the first time you knew that Lime scooters were going to be on the streets and footpaths and cycleways of Auckland was when one overloaded scooter flew past you?
Indeed. Now, it's
What do you think of that?
Well, it's not good.
What should have happened?
Well, I think it should have been escalated to both the Auckland Transport Board and the Auckland Council governing body, because we've got governance responsibilities around safety. We can't exercise those if we don't know.
So what, have you got a problem with the lack of oversight?
Well, I think we've got a problem with delegations. When things are handled under delegations, I think people take those as being complete, but all delegations should be looked at in context.
People listening to this will think it's utterly incomprehensible that you didn't know what was going on.
Yes. The Auckland Transport Board has insisted that when this review is undertaken and the results are through, that has to come through the Auckland Transport Board. Our suggestion would be go through the Auckland Council governing body or committee thereof, but we don't want any decisions made about this unless us as a board have had an opportunity to look at that carefully. So
the decision to go ahead with the trial was made by Auckland Council staff in conjunction with advice from Auckland Transport. Are you saying that decision should have gone before elected officials, before it was rubber stamped? I think it should have gone before the Auckland Transport Board, which are appointed, and the elected officials, because I think that the scale and scope of this should have been more clearly understood. And, impact is important because I don't want anyone to see this as wanting to limit innovation, but what is likely to limit innovation is all these concerns about safety. Do you know how Lime got introduced to Auckland Transport, how it worked behind the scenes? No. So, do you know that Mike Williams, the former president of the Labour Party, who was also a director at Auckland Transport at one point, was paid by Lime Scooter to introduce Lime representatives to Wally Thomas, who works at Auckland Transport, and was also paid to introduce Lime representatives to the Transport Minister, Phil Twyford. Do you have any knowledge of that? No, I didn't know about that. I knew that Mike Williams was somewhat involved, but I didn't know the nature of his involvement. He's a paid lobbyist. Right. So it was payment for introductions.
Right.
And your staff member, Wally Thomas, and this is Mike Williams has told us this, Mike Williams introduced Wally Thomas to Lime as part of paid work as a lobbyist. What do you think of that?
Well, I guess I guess that this happens, and that we would have expected that Lime would have interacted with our staff and not just put in a application for a trading licence. But I would have still expected to know more about this.
Well, because the thing is, it's about impressions, isn't it? And how do you think that looks if you can pay for access, you can get in front of council staff?
Yeah, I don't know if they would have known that he was paid for that, but, basically all you have to do is write to the organisation or present yourself and you would get access.
Are you going to ask some more questions about that?
Indeed.
So do you know the circumstances where Wally Thomas met with representatives from Lime, whether it was at the office, at a restaurant, anywhere?
I have no idea, but I will be finding out.
How comfortable are you with this?
Well, as you would see, I'm quite uncomfortable with many aspects of this. I mean, we work under no surprises policy as a board member and as a chairman. I've been chairman in a number of sectors. Unfortunately, you get quite a lot of surprises.
And that sounds like it was one of them.
It is.
So where to from here then?
Well, deeper, wider investigation from my point of view. You see, in the end, the duty of care that I feel that we as a board owe to the community is that safety needs to be a priority. And now we can't control all user behaviour, but certainly there needs to be better frameworks.
And the thing about safety is this. At the moment, you have a fault with these scooters. It's not people's bad behaviour. It is a random braking fault where people are being catapulted off these scooters.
And as a result, myself and fellow board members believe that unless the burden of proof should be on Lime, unless they can prove with immediacy that there is not a problem, not that they think there isn't a problem, then they should be removed until they can prove that there is no longer a problem.
Is that what is going to happen? You're going to pull them off the streets if by Friday you do not have convincing evidence that this is under control?
That is the instruction that I have given our Chief Executive.
And that is Dr. Lester Levy, who's the chair of Auckland Transport. Since we did that interview, he has sought more details from Auckland Transport staff. He says Auckland Transport staffer Wally Thomas met with Mike Williams and a Lime executive from the US on July 26th last year. That was at Auckland Transport's offices. In November, post Lime's launch here in Auckland, Mr. Thomas and AT's CEO and a safety manager met with Mike Williams and Lime New Zealand representatives. This time it was at the request of Auckland Transport. They wanted to discuss safety concerns, including limiting scooter speed. Now, Checkpoint has invited Mike Williams on to discuss his role with Lime. He declined to be interviewed. We also asked Transport Minister Phil Twyford on the show to talk about Lime and ongoing safety concerns, and he too declined our invitation. It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen to hear what you think on that. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. More than 5,000 early childhood carers are set to lose their government subsidies if they don't get qualified. The government's announcement today that home-based teachers need at least a Level 4 certificate follows a long review and a long-standing call for action. The new rule has divided the sector, with some companies saying it will force educators underground or out of business, and others saying upskilling is a good idea. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
Michelle McCarty has been looking after under-5s from her home in Pahiatua for nearly 12 years. She loves the work, but she won't be bothering to study for a Level 4 certificate.
No, definitely not. To play with kids and to read stories and things, you need a certificate to do that. To give them your time is what I think is the biggest thing that kids need today. Yeah, no, I'll just slowly fade out.
About 7,700 people work as home-based carers under the supervision of trained teachers, and 70% are like Michelle McCarty and have no early childhood qualifications. She says other local home-based educators will probably upskill, but it's not worth it for her.
There's quite a few of us here in Pahiatua. Today's news, they were all a little bit shell-shocked, but I think, yes, some of them will do the study if they want to keep going. probably of the age where I just don't think it's worth it. If I still had another 20 years of working, there may be, yes.
The director of the company that oversees Michelle's work, Raywin Overton-Stewart, says there'll be more educators who choose not to get qualified and others who won't be able to because English is not their first language. She warns that some will keep providing childcare, but their work will no longer be regulated.
That care is basically going to go underground, so we will then no longer have any quality assurance, really. There will be no supported visits from visiting teachers. There will be no extra educational input going into those homes. So in effect, we are going to go backwards.
Raywin Overton-Stewart says improving quality is fine, but the government is going about it the wrong way. Not everyone shares that view. Bernardo's has 370 home-based carers working with about 1,700 children. Its General Manager of Early Learning, Keith Newton, says a mandatory qualification is a good idea.
When educators achieve the level 4 qualification, their level of knowledge and understanding is greatly improved. They have a much deeper degree of knowledge around the early learning curriculum for New Zealand, Te Whāriki, and that also supports positive learning outcomes for children.
Keith Newton says Bernardo's already helps its educators get a level 4 certificate, and he doesn't expect problems ensuring they're all qualified.
From our perspective, we don't believe that achieving the level 4 qualification is going to be too much of a significant challenge for home-based educators in our portfolio.
The government says it will work with home-based educators to decide when the qualification rule will take effect. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Susan Burdett's best friend has told a court she confided in her about a secret relationship with a man named Mike before she was killed. Malcolm Rewa is on trial for the murder of Ms Burdett, who was found clubbed to death in her South Auckland home 27 years ago. Today, Ms Burdett's friend told the jury about a secret man she was seeing. Annika Smith is covering the trial at the High Court in Auckland and filed this report.
Winsome Anstey was today called as the second and final witness in Malcolm Rewa's defence. She told the jury Susan Burdett was her best friend and told her many things, including a romantic secret.
She came and visited me at home, popped in the back door as per normal, didn't need to knock, and she was acting a bit coy. She says, "I've got something to tell you, and I don't want you to tell anyone else." She said, "I don't want anyone else to know."
Winsome Anstey said she felt shocked as Susan Burdett told her more.
She did tell me his full name, but I only remember the name Mike. He was a Maori man. He had gang affiliations. He was married. I think she said he had kids. And she met him down at the Tempin Bowling.
The court had previously heard Malcolm Rewa was a senior member of the Highway 61 gang who had a wife and children. He went by the nickname Hammer, but was also known as Michael Lewis. Rewa maintains he was having a secret sexual relationship with Ms Burdett. Yesterday he told the court they had consensual sex the night she died and he had nothing to do with her rape or death. Mrs Anstey said her friend told her she would party with Mike and others on a yacht.
I was rather intrigued because Sue wasn't really a boating person. I think they stayed overnight and the guys were doing drugs. That was another shock, that she would be associated with that because the Sue I knew was anti-drugs, anti-alcohol.
Rewa had previously given evidence that he never went Tempin Bowling with Susan Burdett and had never been on a boat with her. Mrs Anstey told the jury she emailed the police with her story in 2017 after hearing Rewa might face a third trial. In the email, she names a Mike Rewa, but recanted this on the stand today, saying she couldn't remember the last name. Crown Prosecutor Gareth Kays questioned why she had not approached authorities earlier.
These are memories that you remembered after reading media articles, weren't they?
Well, I would say it probably triggered my memory.
Well, you said in the email, didn't you, that you thought you maybe had forgot or buried your memories. Is that right?
Definitely buried a lot of memories.
I suggest to you that with all the years that have passed, your memory about what Susan Burdett told you over 25 years ago isn't reliable. Do you accept that that's a fair comment?
It could be a fair comment.
Mrs. Anstey said she had been in shock after Susan Burdett died and confirmed she had told police this may be the last chance to get justice for her friend. The Crown and Defence will close their cases tomorrow. Atuiti ko te mātua ko Annika Smith aho.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, we take you right into the thick of Te Matatini, the biggest kapa hakapa competition in the country. And should, businesses who are selling you rosé and other wines and dips, should they have tax-free profits? Are they really charities? We'll look at that too. And we'll look back on the life of Karl Lagerfeld. Don't forget, you can get in touch, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, you can Facebook us, Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But first, here's the headlines with Susanna.
An independent review will be conducted into the parole board's release of a man who went on to murder again. Paul Pounamu Tainui has pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of Christchurch woman Nicole Tuxford in 2018. In 1994, he was convicted of murdering his former partner, and his life sentence came to an end when he was granted parole in January 2011. The chair of the New Zealand Parole Board, Sir Ron Young, says Tainui was released in a decision made by 5 experienced board members and based on extensive information, including psychological opinions. The head of Auckland Transport wants Lime scooters off the road this week unless they can provide solid proof the whole fleet is safe. Several people have been catapulted off the e-scooters due to a braking fault that randomly locks up the wheels. The chair of the agency, Lester Levy, says he raised questions about Lime safety as far back as October and asked Auckland Transport to urgently review the conditions of their trading licence. He says a full safety assessment was needed before the scooter company hit Auckland streets. Home-based early childhood organisations are divided over whether their carers need early learning qualifications. The government wants all in-home carers to have at least a Level 4 certificate in order to access its subsidies. 70% of the 7,700 people providing at-home early childhood education have no early childhood qualification. The head of the GCSB says he came under no political or diplomatic pressure when considering Spark's plan to partner with the Chinese technology firm Huawei. Spark says it's still thinking of submitting a revised proposal to the GCSB in hope of partnering with the company to deliver 5G to New Zealanders after a previous bid was rejected by the agency for security reasons. The GCSB Director General says his decision was independent from ministers and there was no request from any Five Eyes partners to ban any technology vendor. Those are the headlines. I'll be back with the news at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Let's get down to business, Nona, with Nona Peltier. Fletcher Building, it's back in the black in terms of profits.
It is indeed, yes. It made a profit, and that's after, a couple of years of quite miserable results with losses in their building and interiors division. That's the high-rise buildings. Now, they're not out of the woods yet in terms of getting those projects completed, but they haven't had to increase the provisions for losses related to that. That was on the good side. On the bad side, the Australian market is really difficult for them. It accounts for about a third of their income, and it made a 24% underlying profit loss. Underlying profit down 24%. So that, not a loss. I want to make sure there's no losses in any of this conversation. Just clear that up right away. Never mind, though, the market still wasn't really that happy. While the company is seeing some growth prospects in New Zealand, Australia is going to be a drag on their earnings. So their share price fell nearly 6%, down 30 cents to $4.98.
And also Spark and Sky, battle over content. The market doesn't like that.
No, certainly didn't like it on either side. So both of them reported a drop in their profits. Sky TV was down some 20%, and Spark was down about $9 million. So perhaps a better result overall. But never mind, they're both competing there for sport content. That's expensive. The market's concerned about that because it means that prices are really probably going to go up for consumers in any case. It doesn't necessarily flow down to their bottom line in terms of profit. It's really a battle about customers more than anything. Spark wants them. Sky's trying to hang on to them. And Spark's winning the game, and where it goes, where it's going there. And what happens next, we don't know. But John Follett it's his last days as the chief executive at Sky, and so it's somebody else's problem now. Sky TV, it fell 4%, down 7 cents to $1.68, and Spark was down more than 3%, down 13.5 cents to $3.89.5. So overall, the market was up just over 0.25%, which reflects a stronger sentiment that there is going to be a deal between China and the United States on trade tariffs. Oh, back on again. Anyways, we rose, 25 points up to 9,249. And our dollar is trading steady at 68.7 US cents, 95.9 Australian, 52.6 pence.
Thanks, Nona. That was Nona Peltier with the business news for today. The latest electricity recommendations say struggling households should get more help and prompt payment discounts should be dropped. An independent panel says its focus has been on fair and affordable pricing and says government should not introduce pricing caps and other radical changes. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The key recommended change in this options paper is to ditch prompt payment discounts, which are usually awarded to the well-off, while poorer people are charged more for paying late. The panel also recommended extra financial help to struggling households. What is missing is any radical shake-up of the sector, breaking the retail and generation businesses up, or introducing price caps. The advisory panel chair, Miriam Dean, says price caps are too extreme.
Retail price caps, we think, can be a very blunt instrument. They can do more harm than good. We've come up, we believe, with some really practicable options, some options that could bring change quite quickly. Let's see how those work before we resort to very heavy-handed measures like retail price caps.
Meridian's chief executive Neil Barclay says caps hurt new competitors trying to enter the market and can do more harm than good.
And it's been shown internationally, actually most studies ever done, that price caps ultimately start to inhibit innovation, they inhibit or curb customer service, and they ultimately diminish competition. So I think that would be a very bad outcome if we went down that path.
He says on the whole, the electricity sector is working well.
If you compare us with Australia, your average resi customer in this country pays about 40% less than the average Aussie customer. We pay 20% less than the average OECD customer. So the system by and large works.
However, he says the sector can do more to help vulnerable households. Consumer New Zealand's head of research, Jessica Wilson, says that needs to be a top priority.
Mandatory standards for vulnerable consumers, we'd like to see that being made a priority so it can happen without waiting too long a time to see those standards in place, and that we also need to see actually monitoring of those standards to ensure that retailers are complying with their obligations.
And Miriam Dean says this options paper delivers on that promise to help those in need. The plan now is to open up the paper for public consultation, and then final recommendations will be made to the Minister of Energy and Resources later this year. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
The head of the GCSB has denied coming under political or diplomatic pressure to reject Spark's proposal to partner with Chinese telecom firm Huawei to roll out 5G here. Andrew Hampton and the boss of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, appeared before Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee today. They said cyber attacks by foreign governments are becoming more common, with state-sponsored actors not just looking to obtain sensitive information, intellectual property and tech, but also to interfere in New Zealand's democratic systems. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The committee is chaired by the Prime Minister. Other members include the National Party leader Simon Bridges and other party leaders. GCSB Director General Andrew Hampton told them there's been a 10% increase in cyber attacks from foreign governments in the last year.
Sometimes state actors are seeking to access New Zealand information. More often we are hit as part of a global campaign where we may not be targeted. Sometimes we see our networks being targeted so actors can use those to attack someone else.
The GCSB, alongside other Five Eyes members, has attributed large-scale cyber attacks to both China and Russia. But Mr Hampton wouldn't name those responsible for the attacks he cited at the committee hearing.
The process of attribution is a very careful one. There's a very deliberate process that has gone through to make decisions. We won't be doing random attributions today.
But Andrew Hampton did address the GCSB's decision to initially reject Spark's proposal to partner with Huawei for the 5G 5G rollout here because of security concerns in the broader context of New Zealand's relationships with China and Five Eyes partners. He told MPs his is a regulatory function.
My decision was independent from ministers, and while we share intelligence with Five Eyes partners, there was no pressure, requests or demands made by partners, either publicly or privately, to ban any vendor.
On a lighter note, Mr Hampton described how one of the main vulnerabilities for cybersecurity was not the software or the hardware, but the warmware, people.
Despite the highly classified nature of our agency's operating environment, our finance team got an email from me asking to transfer a whole lot of money over. That type of thing. You know, I went to a conference once where they talked about...
They didn't click on it though, did they?
Yeah. They talk about Daves. You know, you don't want to be a Dave. A Dave is someone who clicks on everything that pops up on your screen.
The Director General of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, talked about New Zealand being, like other countries, the target of foreign interference and espionage. She said foreign powers were trying to get hold of information, intellectual property and technology, covertly gain influence over decision makers and pressure individuals and communities to subscribe to particular views or actions. After concerns around foreign interference in the 2016 US presidential election and the Brexit vote, Ms Kitteridge said work had been done ahead of New Zealand's 2017 election.
To work out the kind of steps we would take if we saw that kind of activity in New Zealand. And I'm thankful to say that we didn't, but I don't think we should be complacent.
Ms Kitteridge also told MPs the SIS was aware of a small but concerning number of New Zealand citizens, some with dual citizenship, who are likely to still be in the conflict zone in Syria. She said the agency wasn't aware of any of those people having returned to New Zealand, but wouldn't comment on whether it was aware of any still intending to come home. That issue's been in the spotlight this week, with news a British teenager who ran away to join Islamic State 4 years ago is now pleading to return to the UK. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Winston Peters is standing by his attack on former Prime Minister Dame Jenny Shipley after an article appeared in China's People's Daily under her byline in support of the country's reforms. But Dame Jenny Shipley says she didn't write the piece headlined "We Need to Listen to China" and says she did an interview with the state-run newspaper in December for a feature that had already been published. The National Party has called out Mr Peters and his stance on China for having created tensions in the relationship between China and New Zealand. Here's our political reporter Jo Moyer.
The Foreign Affairs Minister went on the attack at Parliament yesterday before it had been revealed Dame Jenny didn't pen the column. Mr Peters questioned her ability to chair the China Construction Bank New Zealand, saying it was, quote, extraordinary that someone who has so little knowledge of banking, for example, should be in the second biggest bank in China. Today, Mr Peters stood by his criticisms of the former National Party Prime Minister and added that the timing of Dame Jenny's remarks was very unwise.
They are her words. They're in an op-ed in the China Daily. She needs to explain those words.
The Prime Minister wouldn't be drawn on Mr Peters' comments, saying she hadn't seen the full transcript of what he had said. Jacinda Ardern found the way Dame Jenny's quotes had been used quite unusual.
I have to say I was surprised to hear that what had happened there is quite blatantly an interview turned into a column, which I haven't seen before.
Andrew Little, the minister responsible for the Government Communications Security Bureau, says the China Daily isn't a reliable source of information, and Dame Jenny had been bitten by the experience.
The reality is the China People's Daily is a newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party. It is prone to more propaganda than information or news, so that shouldn't be a surprise.
The National Party leader Simon Bridges says Mr Peters' attack on Dame Jenny wasn't in his or the country's best interests.
He should be focused on himself, look himself in the mirror, we know he likes doing that, and having a real good sense of what he's done to see the relationship deteriorate over the last year or so.
Mr Bridges says Mr Peters is responsible for the country's relationship with China being strained in the first place. Dame Jenny told RNZ she didn't want to comment on the issue. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has released a new statement today on the relationship between the two countries. A spokesperson says the ministry wanted to stress again that when it comes to bilateral relations with China, New Zealand has long been occupying a leading position in developed countries as it set many records in bilateral cooperation. The spokesperson went on to say under the new circumstances, China-New Zealand relations are facing new opportunities for development. Following the principle of mutual respect, equality and mutual benefit, the two sides need to enhance mutual trust and cooperation, rise above disturbances and work for the steady and sound growth of China-New Zealand relations. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do let us know what you think of the stories you're hearing today. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. How many of the products in your pantry are made by companies which don't have to pay tax? Heads up, it may be more than you think. As profits earned by businesses owned by charities continue to skyrocket, critics say a centuries-old law which allows those companies to dodge income tax needs to go. It was an issue raised in the Tax Working Group's interim report, and with the group's final report due tomorrow, the government's being urged to make bold changes to bring church companies in line with the rest of the country. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe have been looking into the issue and filed this report.
Strolling the aisles of this Auckland supermarket, it doesn't take me long to fill a shopping basket with tasty, nutritious, charity-owned snacks. From Sanitarium classics like Weet-Bix and Marmite, owned by the Seventh-day Adventists, kiwi fruit and milk from the Trinity Lands Group, run by the Exclusive Brethrens, Rosé and Chardonnay from Mission Estate Wines, that's the Catholic Church, to Lisa's Dips, Naked Soups and Bean Supreme Veggie Burgers, also the Seventh-day Adventists. There's a literal smorgasbord of products which are owned by registered charities and pay no income tax on their profits, not a cent. They're up against other businesses offering very similar products which do have to pay that tax. So is that an even playing field?
Our basic tax policy in New Zealand requires organisations to meet their tax obligations. And in fact, if you look at the basis for tax policy, it talks about equity and fairness.
Standing outside a Seventh-day Adventist church in Rangiora, just outside of Christchurch, charities expert Michael Gourmet is openly critical of its tax-free status, along with other not-for-profits, charitable trusts and iwi groups. He says it gives them a clear business advantage.
And so we've got a situation that's developed in New Zealand, in my opinion, where basically any organisation can decide that it wants to be a charity and run a business and pay no income tax. But the problem is that often those activities aren't related to their charitable purposes.
Reading through page after page of financial returns from the churches, it's incredibly difficult to quantify how much money would be made from taxing them. Cash can come from op shops and sausage sizzles to hospitals and schools. But here are some numbers to consider. Businesses operated by the Seventh-day Adventists made $10.5 million in profit in its last annual return. Trinity Lands, run by the Exclusive Brethren Church, made nearly $19 million, and the Society of Mary New Zealand Companies, which owns Mission Estate Wines, made over $2 million. Last year, the total income of faith-based charities was more than $970 million, but it's very difficult to figure out how much of that was profit. So what do they do with all their cash? Charities have to prove it's going towards their charitable purpose, such as advancing religion, providing education or housing.
We are constrained with our charitable trusts and what our charitable trusts say that we can use those funds for. So I don't think there's any competitive advantage at all, because actually we're quite restrained to what we can use those funds for. And those funds are certainly not going to line anybody's pockets. They're going back to serve the charitable purposes of those organisations.
It's a busy day at Elam Church in Botany. A seniors group is meeting and the church school is in full swing. Chris Bethwaite is the national administrator here and also the chair of the Interchurch Bureau, which represents the business interests of around 30 churches. He says the tax break is vital for the work they do.
I mean, currently the government can't do enough or can't provide the services that are required to help communities and help people in New Zealand, and the churches across New Zealand do a lot of that work for the government. Some of them are in contract with the government and some of them just do it anyway. So yeah, you go and tax churches, it will have an impact on what the churches are able to do, but the churches will find a way and they'll keep trying to do the good that they can. But I think for the amount of money we're probably talking overall in tax, I think the benefits of not taxing churches far weigh out than taxing them and seeing a reducement in the services that churches can own.
But Michael Gourmet says while churches are meant to be limited to using profits for charitable purposes, measuring that can be tricky.
For example, Sanitarium, that we all know so well. If you look at their accounts, you'll find, in fact, in the last 2 years they generated $417 million in revenue from sales of their products. And from that $417 million, $82 million was applied to charitable purposes. $62 million or $63 million of that went directly to the church and disappeared into a black hole. So we have no idea what public benefit that $63 million in the last 2 years has provided.
The government's tax working group has been looking at charities as part of its wide-ranging review into New Zealand's tax setup. It received more than 300 submissions about charities. Many wanted them stripped of their tax-free status. Some said religious groups should not be considered charities because they didn't deem furthering religion to be a charitable activity. The head of Charities Services at Internal Affairs, Maria Robertson, says the charitable sector in New Zealand is highly successful, but a separate review of the Charities Act is looking at whether things could be improved.
The government has announced and is undertaking a review of the Charities Act. It's not going to look at the sort of first principles, if you like, around charitable purpose, but it is looking at the kind of the construct, the mechanisms, the facilities, to make sure that it is fit for purpose. And Minister Henare is conducting that, and he'll be taking quite a lot of advice around that.
She's adamant the process for becoming a charity is a rigorous one, despite there only being 38 staff monitoring more than 27,000 of them. There are checks in place and they must provide annual returns explaining where the cash has gone.
We want to be sure that when people are donating their hard-earned money and time, they can be assured that it's going to where they thought they would go. Now, we have 35 people doing that, between 35 and 40 people. And you're talking about a sector that has assets of over $54 billion and a turnover each year of around $16 billion. So there's also a whole lot of self-regulation that happens in there.
But Michael Gourmet says that self-regulation isn't good enough, that the current setup is a clear failure of tax policy, and he wants this government to put it right. But he often feels like the lone voice fighting against charities' tax-free status.
It's up to Kiwis and people running businesses in competition that are disadvantaged by these organisations that should be speaking out.
People are being encouraged to have their say at community meetings about the Charities Act review next month. They're taking place across the country at a range of venues, including churches, where there may or may not be Lisa's Dips and Mission Estate Chardonnay being handed out. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
Wellington iwi erupted in haka and song on Wellington's waterfront today as they welcomed thousands to the capital for Te Matatini, the biggest kapa haka competition in the country. The Māori King led Manuhiri onto the Waitangi Park as they accepted a wero placed before them by a group of warriors. The 4-day festival will begin tomorrow, where 46 teams from 13 regions across New Zealand and in Australia will take to the stage. Te Aniwa Hurehanganui and visual journalist Bex King were there.
It was a welcome fit for a king. A haka performed by more than 500 people, wearing maro and piu-piu and armed with kaiaha and twirling poi. The spectacle watched by thousands in Waitangi Park. Leading Manuhiri was Kingi Tuheitia, followed closely by some of the best kapa haka performers in the country. Kaumatua Mori Love says it is the responsibility of mana whenua, Ngāti Toa Rangatira, Te Atiawa and Ngāti Raukawa to leave a lasting impression on them.
It's huge because what we need to do is welcome the Māori nation onto our takiwa, and that's a big responsibility. And not only does it have to be culturally correct, but you know, it's about identity. But in the end, that everyone feels really welcome here, and you know, this is the whole motu, and you know, that's a big responsibility.
Among the many manuhiri were past Te Matatini winners, who carried with them the trophies they won 2 years ago. Many others cradled photos of people who have passed away since then. Kai Karanga Arihia Latham says she's excited to see Te Matatini bring Te Ao Māori to the capital.
I'm really looking forward to seeing some whānau perform, and
yeah, it's just such a special opportunity to have this many people and to be immersed in this reel for the week.
Bill Nathan, a member of the oldest kapahaka group in the country, Ngāti Pōneke, has spent many years performing on the Te Matatini stage, and he has a fair idea of how performers will be feeling today.
They'll be tense, they'll be excited, they'll be hyped up, and they'll be wanting to do their best. They will be, and their leaders will ensure that they have plenty of rest and that they know everything. They'll be rehearsing beforehand, but just running through to make sure that they're okay, because everything they've done is deep within their mind. They've practiced so hard, and they'll be ready to go, and they'll be full of excitement and energy.
60,000 people are expected to arrive in the city over the course of the week. Aisha Kahui-Heke from Te Kura o Ngā Rua Hinerangi, who performed the poi at the pōwhiri today, will be among the many people watching.
To see all the groups coming on, yeah, it's going to be mean. I want them all to feel excited and, you know, even some people from across the country, you know, just coming out to check out the amazing things that happen around Matatini, and hopefully they'll learn anything and something out of kapahaka.
Wellington local Eugene Ryder won't be performing this year, but knows how it feels to step out on the Te Matatini stage.
You know, it's scary, it's daunting, it's you know, you feel all your ancestors, all your tupuna come with you when you get on stage. It's just, you know, it's better than probably the Olympics, so yeah, it's a good feeling.
So you'd rather be here than the Olympics?
Hard, any day.
The first performances will kick off tomorrow morning. The winning group will be crowned as champions on Sunday. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pō, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui ahau.
And if you're listening to that story on the way home, it's worth checking out online. We'll put it up there. Some beautiful pictures in that story from Te Anawa and Bex. It will be there if you want to have a look. The fashion world is mourning the death of the celebrated designer Karl Lagerfeld, who was the creative director for fashion houses Chanel and Fendi. The 85-year-old haute couture designer died in France after a short illness. Designers, models, sports personalities and television presenters have all joined a chorus praising the designer. The BBC's Sophie Long looks back on the life of a man known to the fashion industry as the Kaiser.
Always. I always was interested in fashion, even before I knew that it was called fashion. Clothes and what people used to wear was always something that fascinated me.
To design is to breathe, Karl Lagerfeld once said. If I can't breathe, I'm in trouble. It was that all-consuming commitment to couture that led to him being described as one of the greatest designers in the history of fashion.
Fashion is not needed. There may be oral problems in the world who may be more important, so that is not the problem. But it's an industry, and you know, fashion has to go with time. If fashion doesn't go with time, fashion would be lost.
He simultaneously created collections for Fendi and his own signature label, an otherwise unheard-of feat in fashion. But it was his transformation of Chanel which propelled him to rock star status. When he arrived there in the 1980s, he described Coco Chanel as a sleeping beauty and set about slashing hemlines and adding glitz to the previously prim tweed suits of what is now one of the world's most valuable couture houses. The former editor of British Vogue, Alexandra Shulman, said he took Chanel's core ideas and kept them alive year after year.
Whether that was the colour palette, whether it was the little Chanel jackets that she was famous for, the kind of cardigan shapes. He took all of that and he kind of ramped it up. He made it mega in a way that probably wasn't pure Chanel, but was very Karl.
Today, the company's CEO, Alan Wertheimer, said, "Not only have I lost a friend, but we have all lost an extraordinary creative mind." The editor of American Vogue, Anna Wintour, said his creative genius was breathtaking. To be his friend was an exceptional gift. Claudia Schiffer credited him with transforming her from a shy German girl to a supermodel. He was, she said, my magic dust, and the only person who could make black and white colourful. His dark suits, dark glasses, leather gloves and white ponytailed hair made him instantly recognisable. A talented illustrator, Karl Lagerfeld continued to sketch all his designs by hand, despite producing an average of 14 collections a year.
Never make an ugly dress because somebody can buy it.
He was famous for his style, of course, but also his razor-sharp wit and cutting put-downs. He described sweatpants as a sign of defeat, adding you lost control of your life, so you bought some sweatpants.
And time now for a little bit of your feedback, particularly about Lime scooters. You've been emailing and texting and tweeting us all about Lime scooters. This person says, this is ridiculous. Any other business would have been closed down if their product had injured that many people in such a short time. That's from Graham. This one from Kevin. Lime scooters, any person with more than 2 brain cells knew that this was a disaster waiting to happen. The elephant in the room is how something like this happens in full view of the regulator. And this one, a friend I had visiting from San Francisco recently was shocked to see Lime scooters whizzing past on the roads and footpaths. Lime scooters are banned from San Francisco due to safety problems, they say. They do have a different brand, however, that they are allowed on the road with, but the rider must have a driver's licence, wear a helmet, and there is a speed limit. I'm not sure what that speed limit is. Thanks.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. David Bain was shocked to learn that his groomsman, Paul Tainui, raped and murdered Christchurch woman Nicole Tuxford last year. Mr Tainui admitted the rape of Nicole Tuxford at the High Court in Christchurch today, and in October he admitted murdering her. Katie Todd reports.
Joe Karam, a long-time advocate for David Bain, who spent 13 years in prison for the murder of his family before being found not guilty in a retrial, says Mr Bain and Tainui met in prison. Tainui was serving 15 years for the murder of his former partner at the time. Mr Karam says Mr Bain was shocked to the core to hear that Mr Tainui had murdered again, and he thinks that the parole board made a mistake releasing him. The police have also confirmed that on the night Mr Tainui murdered Ms Tuxford, he told officers at a checkpoint that he had knives in his car. He was on parole, but they say he was not breaching his release conditions and showed no indication of his intentions. Ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
The head of Auckland Transport admits there wasn't enough scrutiny of the decision to grant Lime a temporary licence for its e-scooters. Several people have been injured after being catapulted off the company's e-scooters due to a braking fault that randomly locks up the wheels. The chair of the agency, Lester Levy, told Checkpoint that the Lime scooters will be off the streets by Friday unless they can provide solid proof the fleet is safe. He says he raised questions about safety as far back as October and asked for an urgent review of the conditions of their trading licence.
We cannot let cool trump safety. I think because they are very cool and people love them. But, I'm very worried about vulnerable users in particular, the elderly, parents with little children themselves. These are people who may not be alert enough, attentive enough, may not see it coming, may not be able to get out of the way quickly enough. They are subject to serious risk.
Auckland Transport Chair Lester Levy. The Chief Ombudsman says staffing shortages at one of the country's biggest prisons is being capitalised on by gangs. Peter Bosier's report says inmates are locked in their cells at the Auckland South Corrections facility for extended periods of time in response to high staff turnover and roster difficulties. As a result, prisoners do not have enough time outside their cells, and he says the lack of staffing is being exploited by gangs.
One other consequence of there being staff shortages is that the gang influence in this prison, and indeed most prisons, is pretty high. And there is the undoubted evidence here of gang influence, the fact that prisoners are recruited, whether they particularly want to be or not.
Peter Bosier. The Serco-run prison has accepted all but one of Peter Bosier's 36 recommendations. One of the complainants in the sexual assault trial of a police officer has been recalled to give more evidence after a letter she had written to the police praising his actions surfaced yesterday. The jury in the High Court at Auckland heard the letter was dated 3 days after the complainant said she had first been in contact with Kevin Burke, but before she said she was assaulted. The woman accepts she wrote the letter, which praised Mr Burke for believing her when she spoke to him to complain about another matter. But under cross-examination from defence lawyer Arthur Fairley, she said she had absolutely no memory of writing the letter. Mr Fairley said there were contradictions between the evidence that she gave earlier in the trial and the newly recovered letter, but the complainant denies these. Mr Burke has pleaded not guilty to 2 charges of indecently assaulting a woman over 16 and of unlawful sexual connection with a woman over 16. The large power company Meridian says the sector can do more to help the country's most vulnerable households. The chief executive, Neil Barclay, supports offering extra financial support to households in energy hardship, which is one of the ideas in an options paper just released to suggest ways of improving the sector. The electricity price review was set up to investigate whether the electricity market is delivering fair prices. Mr Barclay says that, on the whole, consumers are paying less than overseas.
If you compare us with Australia, your average resi customer in this country pays about 40% less than the average Aussie customer. We pay 20% less than the average OECD customer. So the system, by and large, works.
Neil Barclay from Meridian. 2 men arrested in relation to roofing scams in Auckland have appeared in court. 3 men were arrested early this morning in Lower Hutt. Tommy Ward and William Donoghue were remanded overnight and are due to appear in the Hutt Valley District Court again tomorrow morning. They are both charged with knowing and using documents, a roof care business card and invoice that were false. They are in New Zealand on holiday visas. The third man, James Nolan, did not appear in court today but is facing the same charge. It's 6:05. New Zealand are on track for a 3rd straight one-day cricket win over Bangladesh, with the tourists 184 for 7 after 37 overs, needing 331 for victory. Bangladesh slumped to 61 for 5, and while they have recovered somewhat, they're still well off the pace, needing to score at more than 10 runs an over. Tim Southey has taken 3 wickets and Trent Boult 2. New Zealand have an unassailable 2-0 lead in the 3-match series. Funding for the New Zealand women's hockey team is in limbo after private backer Sir Owen Glenn froze funds because of concerns over the resignation of former coach Mark Hager. Sir Owen has been giving both the men's and women's national teams $1 million each annually, but last month stopped paying Hockey New Zealand for the women's team. Player payments were still made by the national body, but this month's payments from Sir Owen are still under negotiation. Sir Owen was unhappy with how an independent review into the Black Sticks team environment, which ultimately led to Hager's resignation, was handled. Hockey New Zealand says it's discussing Sir Owen's concerns with him. They have defended the delayed release of the review, which is due out on Monday, more than a month after the national body received it. Liverpool have been held to a 0-0 draw at Anfield in their last 16 First League Champions League football match. Barcelona and Olympique Lyonnais also drew 0, all as both sides remain unbeaten in this season's competition. That's the news.
Stemming the tide in Thames.
Do you believe climate change is happening?
I haven't made a response to that question at all.
But I'm asking you.
And I'm not about to.
Feeling the burn again in the US.
Hi, I'm Bernie Sanders. I'm running for president.
And clearing the pipes in Auckland.
Anything's flushable. Golf balls are flushable. We have kids' toys, wallets, false teeth.
Breakfast radio with Bite. Morning report with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, getting away from the CSI factor, Law Commissioner Donna Buckingham on the need to update the law regarding storing and accessing DNA for criminal investigation purposes. And after 10, stories from Whaafawhine, transgender and queer people of Samoa, one of the original continuous Indigenous queer cultures of Polynesia. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast for a Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine spells, a few showers in Northland spreading elsewhere this afternoon or evening. Waitomo to Whanganui, including the central high country. Fine today, scattered showers tomorrow, some possibly heavy. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today. Isolated showers tomorrow, more frequent and possibly heavy south of Napier from the afternoon. Manawatu to Wellington, also wide at upper. Cloudy periods, isolated showers from Kapiti northwards tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine with high cloud. Isolated showers about the Canterbury foothills today. Areas of coastal low cloud morning and night. For Bulla and Westland, occasional showers, some heavy and possibly thundery about Westland tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with scattered showers turning to rain in Fiordland at night. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, occasional rain tomorrow. It's 8.5 minutes past 6 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. KiwiBuild is teaming up with house builder Mike Greer Homes to construct more than 100 houses in West Auckland and Canterbury. The deal means KiwiBuild homes will be built in Canterbury for the first time, with the cheapest selling in Kaiapoi for $360,000. But at the same time as the Housing Minister Phil Twyford was unveiling the plan, National was accusing Housing New Zealand of cutting first home buyers out of the market. Katie Scotcher was at today's KiwiBuild announcement.
Today we're announcing more than 100 properties to be delivered by Mike Greer as part of the KiwiBuild program.
Housing Minister Phil Twyford and residential developer Mike Greer announced the deal in front of 11 completed KiwiBuild homes in West Auckland. They are part of the 39 homes for West Auckland, with another 65 for Canterbury. Balloted KiwiBuild customers will have the opportunity to purchase the 11 completed houses this week, and the rest will be finished by mid-next year. Mr Twyford says the prices range from $360,000 to $650,000.
Some of the homes in this deal with Mike Greer are some of the most affordable that have yet been produced for KiwiBuild.
Mike Greer hopes the Canterbury homes will attract more people to the area.
It has lots of lovely flat land where we can build lots of affordable houses and hopefully reduce the demand on other regions in New Zealand.
Mr Twyford says they are addressing the demand for affordable homes in Canterbury.
Most of the homes that are being built in Canterbury are mid to high end, and we're committed, and with Mike Greer's support, to building large numbers of affordable homes that are in the bottom 25% of the price range, which are the kinds of prices that first home buyers can afford.
The Real Estate Institute's chief executive, Bindi Norwell, says it's too early to speculate how the homes will sell in Christchurch.
Well, we'll see when they're actually ready to be sold, but at those prices, they are within the median prices of those areas.
Opposition leader Simon Bridges says 100 new homes is a good thing, but maintains KiwiBuild was doomed from the start.
The reality is what we've seen, even yesterday, 73% increase in the waiting list for public homes. Now, they've got real problems and they don't seem to have targets, measures or any ability to build them and deal with what we need.
As the announcement was made in Auckland, National's housing spokesperson Judith Collins hit out at Housing New Zealand. She's accusing it of purchasing homes for its stock direct from real estate agents above market price.
The fact is, we have people who have been saving for years, who are going through all of the hoops that they can to buy their first home, and they're being crowded out by someone with a huge checkbook and a relationship with agents which says, come and see me first, I'll give you a bit more.
Ms Collins says the houses purchased cost between $600,000 and $900,000, so those looking for affordable homes are left out. Housing New Zealand's chief executive, Andrew McKenzie, disputed that claim.
We're taking the view that there are people in need of a home and we're buying or building a home for them. We try to focus on new builds. If a builder has a site they want to build on and they are prepared to have some Housing New Zealand homes as part of that development, then we'll go in there.
Mr McKenzie says they're buying houses where necessary, as homes aren't being built fast enough for the demand. I tamaki makoto moti hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is being urged to step in and solve a long-running standoff between the Transport Agency and Auckland homeowners who say roadworks have damaged their houses. More than 20 homeowners say work on the city's southern motorway roadworks caused cracks to their homes, but the Transport Agency denies their claims. Their lawyer, Adina Thorne, says the owners are living in sheer hell. Amy Williams reports.
Conifer Grove straddles Auckland's southern motorway, and homes backing onto it have a 3-metre tall concrete wall at the end of their backyards. The Transport Agency is spending $268 million adding new lanes to the motorway. Construction started in 2015 and is due to finish at the end of this year. Gayleen Smith says it's like living in an earthquake zone.
The house starts shaking like
like you are in an earthquake. We've got cracks appearing around the window frames, all the door jams. Sometimes we can't open doors. At one stage it was so scary we were going to grab the babies and just leave. It was horrendous.
Ms Smith says cracks appeared on her house soon after roadworks began. She says it no longer feels like a home and she wants to sell and move on.
It's coming up 3 years, I guess, of the house shaking, major cracks appearing, door frames moving, internal damage, external damage, and still nobody wants to take responsibility.
Conifer Grove residents Diane Walker and her husband Cliff bought their house more than a decade ago and noticed the first cracks on the house after roadworks began on the motorway just over the back fence. She says the cracks are getting bigger. She says it's been 3 years of pure hell dealing with the effects of the roadworks.
It's horrendous. You just don't sleep at night. We don't know what damage we've got behind the cladding, water damage. The insurance wouldn't allow us to seal the cracks up because they had to follow their process and get the assessors out, and they ended up taking 9 months to do that, to then decline our claim.
The Transport Agency's Senior Manager for Project Delivery, Chris Hunt, says the homes that are at the centre of these claims are not new houses, and there are many factors that can contribute to damage. He says the Transport Agency has a robust process in place for assessing and investigating damage, and that process is being used for all of the claims to establish the best course of action for each one. Mr Hunt says if property damage is not a result of construction work, then the owners are advised to contact their own insurance company to lodge a claim. The homeowner's lawyer, Adina Thorne, says they've tried all avenues and she now wants to meet with the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
I've got guys saying to me, guys in their 30s and 40s saying they're having to take sleeping pills, they can't sleep, they're on antidepressants. I mean, this is a social disaster, and I personally would like to speak to Prime Minister Ardern about it.
Gayleen Smith says it's time someone took responsibility for the damage.
Step up. Step up is all I want you to do. Step up and repair what you broke. It's not a hard decision. Where are the morals of these people? They use government money to damage my home. Use your government money to fix it.
RNZ is waiting to hear if the Prime Minister will consider meeting with the homeowners of Conifer Grove. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
The British teenager who fled London and joined Islamic State 4 years ago is being stripped of her British citizenship. 19-year-old Shamima Begum was found in a refugee camp in Syria last week and has just given birth to a baby boy. 2 other children born during her time with IS died of malnutrition. She is now asking for forgiveness from the UK government and wants to return there, but it appears she may be losing that opportunity. The BBC's security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
The news that the Home Secretary has decided to strip the ISIS wife, Shamima Begum, of her British citizenship has been met with a mixed reaction, both on and offline. Some have welcomed the move, stating that she gave up her right to UK citizenship when she chose to join a proscribed terrorist organisation 4 years ago. But others have questioned the legality of the decision, which appears to rest on her eligibility for citizenship of another country, reportedly Bangladesh. The former Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent, Dal Babu, is a friend of Ms Begum's family.
It seems a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. The family are very, very surprised at that. Essentially, she has never been to Bangladesh. There's a lot in the social media saying that she was born there, never been there. She's only been in Britain. So it seems to be a bizarre decision, and I'm not entirely sure how that will stand up legally.
But speaking to the BBC earlier, the former independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Lord Karl, took a different view.
It now transpires that the mother of Ms Begum appears to be a Bangladesh national. By Bangladesh law, that would mean that Ms Begum is a Bangladesh national. That means that she doesn't have only British nationality. Therefore, if her British nationality is removed, she is not stateless.
Either way, this could become a protracted legal case. Ms Begum's family in Britain want her back, and their lawyer says they will pursue every legal avenue to challenge the Home Secretary's decision. Meanwhile, Shamima Begum and her newborn son Jarrah are likely to remain in a refugee camp in northern Syria while their fate is decided in the courts.
That was Frank Gardner reporting there. An Auckland woman living on the property where a second fruit fly was discovered in the city this week says she's a bit embarrassed about the find. Authorities say it is unlikely they'll ever find out how the fruit fly, which is native to Tonga, made its way to the suburb of Otara. While it doesn't pose the same risk as the Queensland fruit fly discovered in Devonport last week, biosecurity staff have been out in force today, knocking on doors and setting more traps in the area. Sarah Robson reports.
Madison lives at the house where the fruit fly was found in a surveillance trap earlier this week. She says they found out about it when they got a knock on the door from biosecurity staff.
They said it was in our trap. He was saying yesterday that they found one.
And Madison says she was feeling a bit wary about it.
I was a bit embarrassed, but I was right about it, yeah.
Madison says they've been told to expect more visits from biosecurity staff in the coming days as they try to track down any more fruit flies that could be in the area. Other residents on Madison Street are also being visited by biosecurity staff, including Celessa, who lives over the road. Traps have been set up on her property as well, and she's happy authorities have been so quick to respond.
It's all good for protecting the fruits in New Zealand. If it's going to do any good, we'll go for it.
The Ministry for Primary Industries says field teams are checking fruit trees, veggie gardens and compost bins for any sign of fruit flies, and samples are being taken. They're also setting more traps in the immediate area around where the fruit fly was found. But Catherine Duthie from Biosecurity New Zealand says they may never know exactly how the fruit fly ended up in Otara.
It will have come in eggs or larvae on a fruit or vegetable, but we have no knowledge of the pathway. We are looking into that, but like most biosecurity responses, we can almost never tell the exact pathway of entry, which is why we have this surveillance system.
The local community is also getting behind efforts to make sure people know about what they need to do if they live in the controlled area. Swanee Nelson is the founder of the free food pantries that have been popping up in neighbourhoods around Otara. She's putting the message out there on social media and mobilising her own contacts.
You can't beat kanohi ki te kanohi, which is face-to-face. So following on from our local MP and the MPI team, we're going door knocking and actively into those places to talk face-to-face with regards to what's happening.
And Swanee Nelson says people can also expect to hear about it at church on Sunday.
If you know, we have churches on every second corner, and almost every person that's in this community is affiliated or goes to a local church. So word will spread quite quickly.
But this particular fruit fly doesn't pose the same risk as the Queensland fruit fly, which was found in Devonport last week. It targets fewer types of crops and prefers a hotter climate, meaning any flies here would likely die over winter anyway. Meanwhile, the Ministry for Primary Industries has ordered an independent review of its biosecurity systems. An independent expert will be brought in, most likely from Australia, to review border biosecurity to see if there are any holes in the system. The review is expected to take about a month. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The first houses from the troubled Vista subdivision in Tauranga are being removed over the next few days in what will be the final chapter in a long-running saga. 21 houses were condemned in the new development after residents were forced out because of faulty construction. The homes were evacuated in March last year, and a subsequent independent report pointed the finger at the Tauranga City Council, saying it had failed in its inspections and had issued codes of compliance in error. The council eventually bought the properties and settled with the homeowners. I spoke to our reporter Andrew McRae about preparations to remove the buildings on Lake Boulevard.
Well, Lisa, there's 21 of these houses, so a lot of work's been going on the last few weeks preparing them, because each house is an individual property, and they're built, the top layer of the houses, there's 2 stories. The top story is the actual house where people are living, bedrooms, that sort of thing. But the basements, the bottom half of the property, the ground floor, is concrete and concrete block, mainly the garage and that sort of thing. So what they're doing is they're preparing these properties, they've jacked them up, the top story has been jacked up, and each of the 21 21, and they're up on a slope, so it's not easy work. And then once the truck comes in the next couple of days, each one will then be individually removed to another location, leaving just the concrete basements and blocks of these 21 properties. Once the top levels have gone, they'll then demolish all the basements and return the site to what it was pre the development. But what happens after that with that site, we're not too sure at this stage. The council is yet to decide.
I can see behind you some work people, construction people wandering around there. And those houses, obviously, they look brand spanking new. So the bits that they're lifting off the top, what's going to happen to those?
They will be eventually sold because the council made an out-of-court settlement with the owners. The council now owns the properties and their individual houses. They'll then be sold. We're not sure what price they'll be putting on these mainly three-bedroom homes. Whether the council will get enough to recuperate the money they've spent, we don't know yet. They spent up until before the settlement over $2 million with legal fees and security and putting the residents into alternative accommodation. And on top of that, now they have to add in the factor in the cost of the out-of-court settlement. So it's going to be a lot of money. Whether they can recoup that from selling these properties, that's basically an open-ended question. What will happen, though, people can buy these. What they'll have to do is you have to get your own section somewhere, build a base level and put the properties back on top, the houses. The thing is, when people do buy these, none of the construction issues and problems that they had with the subdivision were related to the top story. It was all to do with the basements and the ground level work. So people who might want to purchase these homes can rest assured that they will be in reasonable condition. Of course, when you move them and then put them onto a new site, there's quite a lot of work involved, but I presume it would be cheaper to do that than to build a new house from scratch.
You say still up in the air exactly what's going on with the land, but who owns it now, the land?
The Tauranga City Council took over the properties from the developer and the owners. Remember at the beginning, an independent report was commissioned by a former High Court judge. He found that the council was in error. They'd issued codes of compliance by mistake. They'd ticked off the construction by mistake. So the finger pointed right back at the council. So it's their responsibility. So they pick up the site, the properties, and they paid out the owners. So the owners are happy, well, reasonably happy. They didn't want to leave their beautiful homes. And I spoke to some of them recently, and they really wanted to put the whole saga behind them. They didn't even want to come down in the next few days and watch their former beautiful homes being moved, because they were brand new homes and some people have only just moved into them. So really it's a very sad saga, and the owners, the former owners, really just want to move on and start afresh somewhere.
And that was Andrew McRae, our reporter at the site of the Bella Vista subdivision in Tauranga. Bernie Sanders, the senator who came second to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 Democratic primary, has entered the 2020 US presidential election race. The self-styled Democratic socialist claims he's the right person to topple Donald Trump. Polls suggest he's one of the leading contenders, but the road to the Democratic nomination is long and crowded with other candidates. The ABC's James Glenday is in Washington.
I'm Bernie Sanders. I'm running for president.
With that video statement to supporters, Bernie Sanders kicked off his campaign. He urged his followers to start helping out immediately to build a vast grassroots movement to challenge the political establishment.
I'm running for president because we need leadership that will fight for working families and the shrinking middle class, not just the 1%.
The announcement was hardly a surprise, and many of his key policies are the same ones he's been fighting for, well, years. Among them, Medicare for all, a $15 an hour minimum wage and free tuition at public universities and colleges. In 2016, Senator Sanders was well and truly an underdog.
There is nothing we cannot accomplish.
But among declared and potential candidates this time around, he's one of the leaders of a very crowded Democratic pack, often only second in name recognition surveys to former Vice President Joe Biden. He has a huge social media operation and mailing list, not to mention a proven ability to attract large numbers of small donations. In a sign of how far he's risen, Donald Trump has recently repeatedly attacked some of his policies.
He's going to say Bernie Sanders wants the United States to become Venezuela. What Bernie Sanders wants is to learn from countries around the world why other countries are doing a better job in dealing with income and wealth inequality.
But in some ways, Senator Sanders' success in recent years could make this campaign much harder. The 77-year-old will face many younger, more diverse candidates in the primary, some of whom have adapted or adopted parts of his most popular policy propositions. To win, he'll need to pick up more support from minority voters, particularly African Americans, and his task won't have been helped by recent allegations of sexism and harassment from women who claimed his campaign staff mistreated them in 2016. But there are some analysts who believe he has a much more fundamental problem than even that.
And I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
Although he ultimately conceded to Hillary Clinton, some of his high vote in 2016 was undoubtedly a protest against her. The question is, how much? The senator's sceptics believe some of his supporters could quickly side over to other compromise candidates with more mainstream appeal if the early primaries don't go well.
Let's have some feedback just before we go. This is on the story about Lime scooters and the chair of Auckland Transport, Dr Lester Levy, saying that he wants them off the roads by Friday if they can't prove that the whole fleet is safe. We've had a ton of feedback on this. Susan says it's completely incomprehensible that the council let these things on the road without having any idea of the risks. Unbelievable, she says. This one is from someone in Dunedin who says that Auckland's not the only place where there are issues with these scooters. This person says they were out on the streets with their brother who has a disability and is not agile enough to move at speed, and says that they came around a corner, there were a couple of girls on a scooter and going at speed, and it was difficult to get out of the way. Something needs to be done to stop these idiots from putting those of us who use our feet to get around in danger, they say. And they reckon that the problem's going to be exacerbated with the return of students who they say, quote, are behaving like idiots. Lime, I should remind you, we did ask Lime Scooters to come on for an interview. We've asked more than once, and the answer every single time has been no thanks, but we'll keep on that for you, and hopefully we'll hear from them soon. They do say that they've pulled some of the affected scooters. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, whether you were listening on radio or watching us on TV. Go back and have a look at some of the pictures in those stories. They're great. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Safety concerns over Lime scooters aired by the head of Auckland Transport could see them off the city's streets by the end of the week. The parole board's release of a convicted murderer, Paul Pounamu-Tainui, who went on to murder again, is to be scrutinised. Susan Burdett's best friend has told the Malcolm Rewa trial she confided in her about a secret affair before she died. The head of the GCSB has told MPs he came under no political or diplomatic pressure over Spark's plan to partner with the Chinese technology firm Huawei. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry has today been discussing its relationship with New Zealand, saying the two countries can enhance mutual trust and cooperation by rising above disturbances. Our next news and weather is at 7.